Madame Lucy Okonkwo sat in her grand office on the top floor of Okonkwo Group, her billion-dollar conglomerate. The Lagos skyline stretched before her, but she barely noticed the twinkling lights. Her mind was preoccupied with the most critical decision of her life, handing over her empire to her only child, Chinelo. She had spent decades building this business, making ruthless decisions that earned her the reputation of being one of the most formidable businesswomen in Nigeria. But now, at 65, retirement beckoned. There was just one problem: Tunde Adebayo, Chinelo's husband. Oluchi had never been convinced about him. He was charming, intelligent, and had a background that checked all the right boxes. A lawyer by profession, he had quickly climbed the ranks of a prestigious law firm before venturing into business. To everyone else, he was the perfect son-in-law. But Oluchi had spent her life reading people. And something about Tunde didn't sit right with her. It wasn't anything obvious, no scandals, no rumors. But there was a coldness in his eyes sometimes, a flicker of something darker beneath his polished demeanor. Chinelo was deeply in love with him, and that was enough to make Oluchi cautious. Handing over her company to Chinelo meant, by extension, that Tunde would have access to her vast wealth and power. And Oluchi needed to be certain that he was the right man to stand beside her daughter. Which was why she had made a drastic decision. She wasn't going to hire a private investigator or rely on second-hand reports. No, this was too important. She was going to go undercover herself. Oluchi's longtime assistant, Irdi, entered the office just as she made up her mind. "Madam, your daughter just called," Irdi said, placing a phone on the desk. Oluchi waved it away. "Later." Irdi frowned. "Are you sure about this? You don't have to do it yourself. I could." "No," Oluchi interrupted. "I need to see it with my own eyes." Irdi sighed. "If your daughter finds out." "She won't," Oluchi said firmly. "This has to be done quietly." She had already devised the perfect disguise. She would become Mama Esther, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 50s. With a headscarf, a faded wrapper, and a backstory of needing work to support her grandchildren, no one would suspect that the maid scrubbing the floors was actually one of Nigeria's most powerful women. Her daughter and son-in-law lived in Banana Island, Lagos' most exclusive neighborhood. Getting hired as a housemaid in their mansion wouldn't be difficult. She would use an agency, apply under a fake name, and once she was inside, she would watch. She would listen. She would uncover the truth about Tunde Adebayo. And if he was hiding anything, anything at all, she would find out before it was too late. She would protect her daughter. At all costs. 2 weeks later, Mama Esther arrived at the Grand Adebayo residence in Banana Island. The imposing mansion was a stark contrast to the modest life she now had to pretend to live. Dressed in a faded Ankara wrapper and a loose blouse, her feet in worn slippers, Oluchi clutched a small nylon bag containing a few personal items, just enough to sell the illusion of a struggling old woman in need of work. The security guard at the gate barely gave her a second glance before letting her in. The housekeeper, Andy Rose, a plump woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of authority, greeted her at the entrance. "You are the new maid?" Andy Rose asked, eyeing her up and down. "Yes, Ma," Oluchi answered, her voice softer than usual, carefully laced with a slight Eastern accent. "My name is Esther. Mama Esther." Andy Rose nodded approvingly. "The agency said you've worked in big houses before." "Yes, Ma. I have been working in different homes for many years," Oluchi lied smoothly. "Good. Come inside." Oluchi followed her into the mansion, taking everything in, the sparkling marble floors, the high ceilings, the expensive artwork on the walls. She had been in this house before, but never like this. Never as an outsider. Auntie Rose led her to the kitchen, where 2 other housemaids, Blessing and Sade, were busy with dinner preparations. "This is Mama Esther," Auntie Rose announced. "She will be helping around the house." Blessing, a young girl of about 22, flashed a friendly smile. "Welcome, Mama." Sade, who looked to be in her late 20s, merely gave a curt nod and continued chopping vegetables. "You will start by cleaning the main living area," Auntie Rose instructed. "Then, later, you will help me prepare the guest rooms." Oluchi nodded obediently. She wasn't here to argue or stand out. She was here to observe. As she swept the living room, she heard the front door open. A familiar voice rang out, "Chinelo." Oluchi's heart clenched. It had been almost 2 weeks since she had last seen her daughter. She forced herself to keep her head down as Chinelo and Tunde walked in, engaged in conversation. "Baby, You're worrying too much, Tunda said, slipping off his suit jacket. I just feel like something is off, Chinello replied. My mother hasn't been herself lately. Alucci stilled. What do you mean? Tunda asked, pouring himself a drink from the bar. She's been avoiding me, Chinello said. She keeps postponing meetings about the company transfer. It's not like her. Tunda chuckled. Maybe she's having second thoughts. Alucci risked a glance at him. He was leaning against the bar, looking completely at ease. But something about his tone made her uneasy. I don't think so, Chinello said. She's been planning this for years. Tunda shrugged. Then maybe she's just trying to make sure everything is perfect. Maybe, Chinello murmured. Alucci kept her head down and continued sweeping as they moved upstairs. But she caught the glance Tunda threw over his shoulder, one that lingered for a second too long. Had he noticed her? No. She was just another maid to him. For now. A strange discovery. That night, as the house grew quiet, Alucci decided to explore. She moved carefully through the corridors, her experienced eyes taking note of the small, telling details, the locked study door, the security cameras positioned at odd angles, the flickering light in Tunda's home office. Then she noticed something else. A small, leather-bound notebook carelessly left on a side table near the office. She hesitated, then picked it up. Flipping through the pages, she saw dates, figures, and names she didn't recognize. But one entry made her blood run cold. Transfer confirmed. She suspects nothing. Soon, it will all be mine. Her heart pounded. Who was this about? Her daughter? The company? Something else entirely? One thing was certain, Tunda Adebayo was hiding something. And she was going to find out why. The next morning, Alucci, now Mama Esther, began her duties as a housemaid. She scrubbed the marble floors of the grand living room, dusted the expensive chandeliers, and cleaned the glass walls overlooking the well-manicured garden. But while her hands worked, her mind was busy watching. Tunda Adebayo and her daughter, Chinello, were a picture-perfect couple. They had been married for 5 years, and in that time, Tunda had charmed everyone, including Chinello's friends, the business world, and even some of Alucci's board members. But Alucci had learned long ago that the most dangerous people wore the kindest smiles. As she dusted near the dining area, she listened carefully to Tunda and Chinello as they sat down for breakfast. You're working too hard, my love, Tunda said, spreading butter on his toast. You barely slept last night? Chinello sighed, rubbing her temples. I just have a lot on my mind. Still worried about your mother? Yes, she admitted. She's acting strange. Ever since she started talking about stepping down, she's been distant. Tunda took a sip of his coffee. Maybe she's nervous about the transition. Chinello hesitated. Or maybe she doesn't trust you. Alucci's heart stopped mid-beat. Tunda froze, but only for a second. He let out a small chuckle. Chinello, you know your mother has never trusted anyone but herself. But we don't need her approval. The company will be in your name, not mine. Chinello nodded, but her face remained troubled. I just wish she would talk to me. Tunda reached across the table, taking her hand. She will, when she's ready. Until then, let's focus on us, okay? Chinello sighed. You're right. Alucci clenched the rag in her hand, willing herself to remain calm. Tunda was good. Too good. If she hadn't already been suspicious of him, she would have believed every word. But she knew better. Later that afternoon, Alucci was in the kitchen peeling yams when the older housekeeper, Auntie Rose, pulled her aside. You're doing well, Mama Esther, Auntie Rose said, lowering her voice. But be careful. Alucci frowned. Careful of what? Auntie Rose glanced around before whispering, this house. It has eyes everywhere. A chill ran down Alucci's spine. What do you mean? Auntie Rose sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. I've been working here for 3 years. Things happen in this house that don't make sense. Staff come and go, and no one asks questions. Alucci felt her pulse quicken. Like what? Auntie Rose hesitated. Then, in a voice so low it was almost inaudible, she said. The last housemaid before you. She disappeared. Alucci's stomach dropped. Disappeared? She echoed. Auntie Rose nodded. One day, she was here. The next, she was gone. No explanation. A wave of unease settled over Alucci. Had the previous maid discovered something? Had she seen something she wasn't supposed to? And more importantly, had Tunda silenced her? Alucci knew one thing for certain. She had to move carefully. Very carefully. She wasn't just investigating a man who might be after her company. She might be investigating a man capable of making people disappear. Alucci barely slept that night. Auntie Rosa's words replayed in her mind. The last housemaid before you. She disappeared. That wasn't something to be taken lightly. People didn't just disappear without a trace. And in a house this wealthy, where every move was monitored, it was even more suspicious. What had she found out? More importantly, was Alucci heading down the same path? Lying on the thin mattress in the small maid's quarters, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She needed to get closer to Tunda. To watch him carefully. If he had a secret, she would find it. The next evening, Alucci was dusting the shelves in the hallway when she heard a soft click, the sound of a door unlocking. She turned slightly, careful to keep her movements natural. Tunda stepped out of his study, straightening his suit. His phone was in his hand, and he was speaking in a low, serious tone. "We can't afford any mistakes," he was saying. "The timing has to be perfect." A pause. Then he added, "She suspects nothing." Alucci's fingers tightened around the duster. Who was he talking about? Chinello? Her? Before she could hear more, Tunda noticed her. He ended the call immediately and pocketed his phone. His eyes flickered to her for a moment. Alucci kept her expression blank, lowering her gaze like a good, obedient maid. But she could feel his stare lingering. Then, just as quickly, he walked past her without another word. She let out a slow breath, her hands slightly trembling. Tunda was hiding something. And she was going to find out what. The next day, Alucci noticed something unusual. Tunda wasn't going to work. He was dressed in casual clothes, a dark polo and jeans. He kissed Chinello goodbye and left the house without taking his usual driver. That wasn't like him. Alucci knew his schedule. He was always precise, always controlled. If he wasn't going to the office, then whatever he was doing was something he didn't want anyone to know about. Her instincts kicked in. She had to follow him. Alucci had been a billionaire long before she was a maid, and she still had powerful contacts. Before going undercover, she had arranged for an old friend, a retired detective, to be on standby. Now, she made a quick call. "Tunda just left the house," she whispered. "I need a car." Within minutes, a battered old Toyota Corolla arrived near the servants' entrance. Alucci slipped inside, pulling her headscarf lower to avoid attention. "Where to, madam?" the driver asked. "Follow that black Range Rover." The chase had begun. Tunda drove to a small, discreet hotel in Victoria Island. He parked in the back, away from the main entrance. Alucci's heart pounded. She had thought she might catch him with another woman. That would have been bad enough. But what happened next was worse. Tunda stepped inside the hotel, and moments later, a man in a gray suit appeared and followed him. A business meeting? No. This was different. Alucci quickly got out of the car and followed at a distance. She couldn't risk being seen, so she waited near the lounge, pretending to be a cleaner wiping down a table. She could see them through the glass doors of the private meeting room. Tunda was speaking, gesturing forcefully. The other man listened, nodding occasionally. Then, the man slid a brown envelope across the table. Tunda picked it up, checked inside, and smiled. Alucci's breath caught. A bribe? A payoff? Then, she saw something else. Tunda leaned forward, his expression turning serious. She barely read his lips, but she caught the words. "She has no idea." A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't about an affair. This was something far more dangerous. Alucci remained frozen in place, pretending to wipe the already spotless table as she tried to process what she had just seen. Tunda sat across from the man in the gray suit, his posture confident, his expression unreadable. He opened the brown envelope and quickly scanned its contents before tucking it into his jacket pocket. The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. Alucci strained to read his lips. "The accounts are almost secured." Tunda nodded. "Good. It has to be done before she changes her mind." "She?" Alucci's heart slammed against her ribs. Was he talking about Chinello? Or me? The other man spoke again. "And the will?" Tunda smirked. "Taken care of." Alucci nearly dropped the rag in her hands. The will? Had he done something to Ginella's inheritance? Was he trying to steal the entire company? She needed to know more. She turned, ready to slip away before they noticed her. Crash! Her elbow knocked a glass off the table, sending it shattering to the floor. She sucked in a sharp breath. Idiot! Tunda's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto her through the glass door. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, he stood up. Alucci grabbed the mop beside her and quickly started cleaning, keeping her face down. She heard the door creak open as Tunda stepped out. She felt him watching her. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away. She only allowed herself to breathe once he was gone. That was close. Too close. She had to get back into that house. And she had to do it fast. That night, Alucci returned to the mansion with only one goal in mind, getting into Tunda's study. She had seen enough to know that he was planning something. But what exactly? She needed proof. After everyone had gone to bed, she waited for an hour before quietly slipping out of her small servants' quarters. The house was eerily silent as she padded barefoot across the polished floors toward Tunda's study. The door was locked, as expected. But Alucci had always been prepared. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small metal hairpin. It had been a long time since she had done something like this, but her hands remembered the movements. Click. The lock turned. She eased the door open and slipped inside. The study was large, with bookshelves lined with legal books, a mahogany desk at the center, and a liquor cabinet in the corner. She went straight for the desk, pulling open the drawers. Nothing but business documents. She checked the bookshelves, scanning for anything out of place. And then she saw it. A small rug near the corner of the room. Something about it seemed off. She pulled it back, and her breath caught. A floor safe. Her pulse pounded. This was it. Whatever Tunda was hiding, it was inside that safe. But she had no idea how to open it. She needed the combination. And to get that, she needed to get closer to Tunda. Much closer. The discovery of the hidden safe confirmed Alucci's worst fears. Tunda was hiding something big. But without the combination, she had no way of getting inside. She needed to get closer to him, to observe his habits, to find any clue that might reveal the code. And she needed help. There were only two other maids in the house, Blessing, the young and talkative one, and Sade, the older, quiet one. Alucci had her doubts about Blessing. The girl was always eager to please, but something about her felt too eager. Too watchful. That left Sade. If anyone knew secrets about this house, it was her. That afternoon, while washing dishes, Alucci casually struck up a conversation. Sade, how long you donde work for Madame Anoga? Sade glanced around before answering. 3 years. Alucci lowered her voice. You sabi wedding happened to the last maid? Sade stiffened. Why you dey ask? Alucci leaned in slightly. I hear say she just disappear. Sade hesitated. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, she said. Be careful, Mama Esther. People who ask too many questions. They disappear too. A chill crawled up Alucci's spine. Sade knew something. But before she could press further, Blessing walked into the kitchen. Sade immediately turned back to washing dishes, her lips pressed together. Alucci didn't miss the way Blessing's eyes flickered between them. Was it just suspicion? Or was Blessing spying for someone? Alucci would have to be careful. Very careful. Later that night, Alucci was heading back to her quarters when she heard hushed voices. She slowed her steps and pressed herself against the wall, listening. It was Blessing. She was on the phone. I swear, she's snooping around too much. A pause. Yes. Okay, I will watch her. Alucci's breath caught. Blessing was reporting on her. But to whom? Tunda? Someone else? One thing was clear, she couldn't trust anyone in this house. Not even the servants. The next morning, Alucci noticed something odd. Tunda, always meticulous about his routine, did something out of the ordinary. Instead of heading straight to work after breakfast, he went back to his study. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he was carrying a black leather briefcase. Alucci had never seen him use it before. Her instincts flared. He left the house shortly after, and Alucci took the opportunity to check his study. Sure enough, the briefcase was gone. But he had left something behind. The floor safe. Still locked. Still waiting to reveal its secrets. And Alucci was running out of time to crack it. Alucci knew she needed to act fast. The safe in Tunda's study held secrets, dangerous ones. And if she didn't uncover them soon, she could end up just like the last maid. Missing. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she crept back into the study. The safe was still there, mocking her. She ran her fingers over the combination lock. It was a standard model, 4 digits. Her mind raced. Tunda was too clever to use something obvious like his birthday or anniversary. She had to think like him. What numbers mattered to a man like Tunda Adebayo? She glanced around the room, searching for clues. Then, her eyes landed on a framed newspaper article on his desk. It was an old business headline. Tunda Adebayo secures multi-million deal, 2017. Her heart pounded. Could that be it? She knelt in front of the safe and turned the dial. 2, 0, 1, 7. Click. The lock released. For a split second, relief washed over her. Then, she heard it, a soft creak behind her. Someone was standing in the doorway. She whipped around. Sade. The older maid stared at her, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a whisper, Sade said, "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Alucci's pulse pounded. She could see the fear in Sade's eyes. She wasn't here to report her. She was terrified. "Sade," Alucci said quietly, standing up. "You know something." Sade hesitated. Then, in a barely audible voice, she said, "If you open that safe, your life will never be the same again." Alucci took a step forward. "Then help me. What is Tunda hiding?" Sade glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to walk in. Then, she grabbed Alucci's wrist and pulled her close. "Tunda isn't who he says he is." Alucci frowned. "What do you mean?" Sade swallowed hard. "I've worked in rich homes before, but I've never seen a man like him. He's too careful. Too secretive. And the last person who got close to his secrets." Her voice trembled. "Vanished." Alucci's breath caught. "The last maid?" Sade nodded. She was asking questions about his business. The next day, she packed her things and left. Or at least, that's what they told us. But I never saw her leave. Alucci felt a chill creep up her spine. She turned back to the safe. If she opened it, there was no turning back. But she had come too far to stop now. Slowly, she knelt down and pulled the door open. Inside, she saw exactly what she had feared. Stacks of documents. Bank statements. Property deeds. And at the very top, a folder labeled Alucci Holdings. Her company. Her legacy. And inside that folder was the proof she had been dreading. Tunda had been moving assets behind Chinello's back. Her grip tightened around the papers. This wasn't just about money. Tunda was planning to take everything. And if she didn't stop him soon, he would succeed. Alucci's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. Fake signatures. Unauthorized transactions. Offshore accounts. Tunda had been systematically transferring assets from Alucci Holdings into shell companies, companies registered under his name. He wasn't just trying to secure his future. He was trying to steal the company out from under Chinello. Sade peered over her shoulder, her face pale. "Madam, what does this mean?" Alucci exhaled shakily. "It means my daughter is married to a snake." Her mind raced. Tunda hadn't made his final move yet. If he had, the company would already be out of her control. That meant she still had time. But not much. She needed to get these documents out of the house before Tunda discovered they were missing. She closed the folder and turned to Sade. "You have to help me." Fear flickered in Sade's eyes. "Madam, this is dangerous." "I know. But I can't do this alone." Sade hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Alucci stuffed the documents inside the folds of her uniform. She would make a copy first thing in the morning and find a safe place to keep them. But as she and Sade stepped out of the study, a cold voice sliced through the silence. "What are you doing in here?" Alucci's blood ran cold. Tunda stood at the end of the hallway, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Alucci forced a smile and lowered her gaze. "Sorry, Olga. I was just cleaning." Tunda's eyes flicked to Sade, then back to Alucci. "At this hour?" She nodded quickly. "Auntie Rose say make I clean all the rooms before morning." Tunda stepped closer, his gaze drilling into hers. "Is that so?" Sade quickly added, "Yes, sir. We no wan disturb you during the day, so we day clean now." For a long moment, Tunda simply stared. Then, he smirked. "Next time, don't touch my things." Alucci's stomach clenched. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be suspicious. He brushed past them and entered the study. Alucci and Sade hurried away before he could change his mind. Once they were out of earshot, Sade whispered, "He knows something." Alucci swallowed hard. "I know." They had to move faster. Because now, Tunda would be watching. And he wouldn't hesitate to make them disappear too. By morning, Alucci had hidden copies of the documents in a safe place. But now, she had a new problem. Someone had told Tunda about her. There were only 3 other staff members in the house. Auntie Rose, the head housekeeper, who had been working for the family for years. Sade, who had proven to be an ally. Blessing, the eager young maid. Alucci thought back to the whispered conversation she had overheard, the phone call Blessing had made. "I swear, she's snooping around too much." Was she reporting to Tunda? Alucci needed to be sure. That afternoon, she set a trap. She left one of Tunda's business files in a place where it looked like she had forgotten to put it away. Then, she waited. Within an hour, Blessing picked up the file, glanced around nervously, and disappeared down the hallway. Alucci followed silently. She watched as Blessing knocked on the study door. Tunda's voice came from inside. "Enter." Alucci's hands clenched into fists. Blessing was working for him. And now, she was running out of time. Alucci's heart pounded as she watched Blessing slip into Tunda's study. That little snake. She had suspected it, but now she was certain, Blessing was spying for Tunda. The door shut behind the girl, leaving Alucci in the dimly lit hallway, her mind racing. She had the proof of Tunda's betrayal hidden away, but that wasn't enough. She needed a way to expose him publicly before he made his final move. She couldn't afford to play defense anymore. It was time to attack. Alucci waited until Blessing left the study. The girl looked tense, her brows furrowed in concentration. She was on a mission. Alucci followed her at a distance, careful not to be seen. Blessing slipped into her tiny bedroom and shut the door. Alucci crept up to the window and listened. The girl's voice was low, but Alucci could make out bits of the conversation. "Yes, sir. She's been snooping. I don't know what she found, but she's up to something." A pause. Then. "Should I get rid of her?" Alucci's blood ran cold. She didn't wait to hear more. She had to act now. She hurried back to her quarters and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years. After 2 rings, a deep male voice answered. "Madame Alucci." She exhaled shakily. "Detective Folarin, I need your help." A pause. Then. "I'll be there in an hour." Detective Folarin arrived exactly 1 hour later, dressed in plain clothes. They met at a small cafe outside the estate, away from prying eyes. Alucci slid the stolen documents across the table. "Tunda is planning something big. He's been transferring assets, forging signatures. He's going to take my company." Folarin flipped through the files, his expression darkening. "This is serious." He looked up. "We need more than this. If we want to bring him down, we need to catch him in the act." Alucci exhaled. "How?" Folarin smirked. "We set a trap." Tunda thought he was the only one playing the game. But now, Alucci was about to outplay him. With Folarin's help, she set up a fake business deal, one that would look too tempting for Tunda to resist. A billionaire investor, actually an undercover agent, would meet with Tunda, offering a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. All he had to do was finalize the transfer of Alucci Holdings. And the moment he did, the authorities would pounce. Tunda took the bait. The meeting was set for the next evening at a 5-star hotel. Alucci, disguised in a wig and dark glasses, sat in the lobby, watching as Tunda entered the private lounge. She could barely contain her anger as she watched him smile and shake hands with the investor, the man he believed would make him even richer. Inside, hidden cameras recorded everything. Tunda pulled out the forged documents, ready to sign away Aluchi Holdings. The moment his pen touched the paper, the doors burst open. Freeze. EFCC. Hands where we can see them. Tunda's face twisted in shock as agents swarmed the room. He tried to run, but Falarin stepped in front of him. Going somewhere? And just like that, Tunda Adebayo's empire came crashing down. The news exploded across Nigeria. Billionaire CEO's son-in-law arrested for fraud. Tunda had underestimated the one person who knew how to beat him, Aluchi. Chinelo, devastated, confronted her mother. "You knew all along?" Aluchi nodded. "I had to be sure. I had to protect you." Tears welled in Chinelo's eyes. "I loved him." Aluchi pulled her into a hug. "I know. But love should never cost you your future." Tunda was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Blessing disappeared the night of his arrest, confirming Aluchi's suspicions that she had been working for him all along. As for Sade, she remained loyal to the end, helping Aluchi clean up the mess left behind. The company was saved. But most importantly, so was Chinelo. Weeks later, Aluchi stood in her office, gazing out at the Lagos skyline. She had come so close to losing everything. But she had fought back. And won. Chinelo stepped in beside her. "So, what happens now?" Aluchi smiled. "Now, my dear, I hand over the company to its rightful owner." Chinelo gasped. "You mean?" Aluchi nodded. "You're ready." Chinelo hugged her tightly. "I won't let you down." Aluchi looked at her daughter with pride. She had risked everything to protect her. And now, she was finally free.